Welcome, members, guests, and speakers. Thank you all for attending in person and online. For our September general meeting, we've invited an expert panel to cover an important issue, the proposed I-15 expansion and the environmental impact study. Thanks to Haley Keller and Marge McCoy, and especially Becky Davis for arranging this panel. As is our tradition, the League of Women Voters of Salt Lake would like to begin tonight's meeting by acknowledging that we are gathering on Indigenous land. The Salt Lake Valley has always been a gathering place for Indigenous peoples, and we acknowledge that this land, which is named for the Ute people, is the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute nations, and is a crossroad for Indigenous peoples. We pay respect to the elders, past and present. We also consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that are our history and legacy, and seek to uncover the truth. For 100 years, the League of Women Voters has been a nonpartisan activist grassroots organization that believes voters should play a critical role in democracy. We encouraged informed and active participation in government, work to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influence public policy through education and advocacy. Simply put, our mission is to empower voters and defend democracy. A recording of tonight's event will be made available to the public and on the League of Women Voters of Salt Lake website and on our social media. Other recordings of this event, whether they be in person or of a computer screen, may not be used without the express written approval of the League. The League will only allow audio-visual of this event to be broadcast in its entirety, except by media reporting on this event. There will be important League announcements in an actual meeting at the end of this panel discussion. And now I would like to introduce our panelists. I'll introduce them in the order in which they will speak. Tiffany Pocock joined the UDOT, Utah Department of Transportation, in 2017. And since then, she has been involved in a diverse range of UDOT efforts, including project management of Utah's road usage charge program, and currently the I-15 EIS from Farmington to Salt Lake. She is known for her collaborative leadership style, respect for diverse perspectives, and commitment to excellence. She holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the University of Nevada. Julianne Sabula is the Deputy Director of the Salt Lake City Transportation Division. She has 20 years of experience in transportation, financial, land use, and environmental planning, and holds degrees in urban planning and cultural anthropology. She is responsible for transportation's fiscal planning and management strategizing. During her time with Salt Lake City, she developed the city's first transit master plan, and through unique interagency partnerships has delivered several of its recommendations well ahead of the plan's 20-year horizon. These include 3 frequent east-west bus routes, with a 4th to launch in August, or that launched in August, an on-demand microtransit program, and an infrastructure program of bus corridor improvements and bike pedestrian access to transit, fare and pass programs, and an outreach education and marketing program. Next, Meisei Gonzalez is HEAL's Community Communications Associate. He previously worked in digital communications at Alliance Community Services and graduated from the University of Utah with a degree in strategic communications. He has dedicated his work to advocacy and has spent multiple years fighting for immigrant rights, providing COVID-19 education, and organizing in various communities. Meisei was raised in Salt Lake City, but has family in California and Mexico, where his family is originally from. Dan R. Strong was elected president of Westside Coalition in March 2022. Dan has been an advocate for the Westside and his Rose Park neighborhood since moving here in 2012. Dan has served as secretary and chair of the Rose Park Community Council and communications director for the Westside Coalition. In his day job, Dan works as the director of the Utah Sentencing Commission, coming to that job after 10 years as a prosecutor. Dan believes West Salt Lake City's neighborhood are the best in the state. Dan is eager to help build on their potential while preserving what makes them great. We will hear from each of our panelists in turn about the proposed I-15 expansion, and then we will turn to let them have an opportunity to respond to one another, and finally we will then turn to questions from the audience. And first, if I can get the camera angle right. It's Tiffany Pocock from UDOT.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tiffany Pocock. Oh, can you guys hear me okay? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tiffany Pocock. I am the Program Development Director at UDOT, and I thank you and our panelists for the opportunity to talk today. Oh, you can't hear me. It's like, it doesn't sound okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tiffany Pocock. I am the Program Development Director at UDOT, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the study today, and also lend a thankful hand to my fellow panelists. Today, I wanted to start on a statewide level talking about the regional transportation plan that the state has, and then narrow in on UDOT's vision, and then specifically on the study of interest today. I'll go through the environmental process, ways for you and your constituents to engage here in the future, and next steps. As I mentioned, I wanted to start with the regional transportation plan. This looks at the growth and the transportation solutions statewide. I just wanted to hone in on the fact that here in Salt Lake, there are a number of other studies and developments for planned in the area, including double tracking and electrification of the front runner projects, as well as the new transit program, not transit program, the trails program that has been started by the state to facilitate sort of a freeway for the trails initiative. UDOT's mission is to improve quality of life through transportation, thinking about better mobility, good health, connected communities, and a strong economy. From the beginning of this study, that was part of the milestones that we have included into each phase, as I'll walk through our purpose and need, our alternatives, and where we're at today to complement the quality of life through transportation vision. This is the environmental process that the state follows. That's a national requirement for all environmental studies. And I'll just clarify that this is an environmental study, not an expansion plan. And I'll go over each one of these milestones just as a review for this, for the people online and for the people in the audience. We have gone through public engagement and efforts through the needs and alternatives, and are currently, as you can see on the screen, about to come into the draft EIS phase. Starting from the very beginning with the needs, I-15 is an existing asset that if many of you have traveled on it, it needs to be reconstructed. Not just the pavement section, but the utilities and structures in the area. The asset is in need of repair. We also want to hone in on some safety elements. On the right, you'll see kind of a heat map of crash history that we're looking at. Some components we are concerned about are some sharp curves, the ability for emergency access to use more safe shoulders. But we also are looking at the interchanges themselves, and each interchange is a little different. It's a very unique corridor, but throughout the needs phase, we did recognize that each community has its own unique needs, and so you'll see those as I move into the alternatives phase of what those look like. The other thing we saw as a need in the corridor is to connect, as I mentioned, all the users, not just vehicles. And so we did what we call walk audits on the interchanges, and had the team and the community members walk them with us, and recognize that improvements were needed in the corridor. So this is what's called the purpose and need. And as I mentioned, that is a milestone in the EIS process. That happened a couple of years ago now, where I won't read this, but again, it kind of mirrors our quality of life framework, making sure that we are thinking about all users, thinking about the freight industry with our economy, and thinking about the community context and listening to that need as well. This is what's called the alternative screening process, where we think about those ideas, we create needs, and then we put them through what's called the screening process, where we make sure that, again, we're being contextually sensitive to the needs, making sure that it fits within the natural and built environment, and is a part of the regulatory impacts. We'll just go over the alternatives that we released over the fall. For I-15 itself, it was a 5 general purpose lane with a express lane system in each direction. And then we also considered what we're calling the reversible express lane system, where in the AM and the PM, those express lanes are reversed. I'm not going to read this graph to you, but the main takeaway I wanted you guys to recognize or see is that the state is not expecting I-15 to stay at the level of service and congestion that we see today. The state is growing. That's why we rely on the regional transportation plan. Either alternative in the future will see congestion because we are relying on the other assets like Front Runner, the other BRTs, and our trail network to be successful. This is, again, I recognize that we're, looking at the Salt Lake area tonight, but corridor wide, all 16 miles. This is just on the right, a look through of the improvements that we are looking at for walkers, bikers, scooters, and that aren't using vehicles. On the left is just kind of the toolbox the team put together to, again, at the interchanges, have vehicles recognize that they are leaving an interstate system and connecting to the community. So slowing cars down, thinking about all users. Again, we have 17 miles. There are several interchanges. Some that I'll talk about in Salt Lake are because of the efficiencies with the different interchanges, we are able to take the industry truck traffic. Currently, that route exists on 600 North with a new interchange up at Warm Springs. Again, we can make 600 North look more walker, biker friendly, part of the community. And so with that efficiency, all of the interchange reconfiguration on State Street, we are able to put Beck on a road diet. And so we have 3 lanes currently going northbound. We are taking one of those lanes and making them a shared use path rather than a vehicle lane. We are looking at 600 North, working with the city. They have, I believe, a study also happening on 600 North. And so matching that vision so that there's a shared connection across that arterial. And at 1000 North, we are providing what's called a full connection. So you can use I-15 in any direction at 1000 North for the Rose Park community. In the interest of, again, getting that communications out with the community, we did conduct local area working groups at each one of the milestones. Those were a makeup of a well-rounded makeup of individuals that could, again, those are the people that live in the community and understand the needs. And so we worked with those groups to understand, like I said, there are several interchanges in the corridor. Each one looks a little different. Each one, we heard kind of a different community sensitivity. We did hold open houses at our major milestones. Some efforts that we use to reduce barriers for participation in those events were food, transportation, and kids corners, so that because typical open houses are usually hosted at a time that could be in conflict with certain members of the community. These are just some metrics of what we saw and got. Like, we had a lot of good feedback during the alternatives process, and we've had a lot of good things to work on since the release in the fall up until now, which is when we are about to release the draft EIS. Lastly, thank you for your time. Look forward to continuing the communication. And this is just how to get, even though we are not currently in a formal public comment period, we are open to having just like this, conversations and working to understand the community's needs more. Thank you for your time.
And next we'll hear from Julianne Sabula from Salt Lake City.
Thank you. Can folks hear me okay? Great. So I am happy to be here with all of you and to be able to talk about this project. It's something that we care about a lot at Salt Lake City and for our residents. And I'm going to start with maybe kind of a funny slide. And why I say that is because the city does oppose widening the freeway. But given that perspective, we've had a really good experience working with this UDOT team. And so I have kind of a list of bullets here as to why they've been great in working with us in terms of just using layman's terms. You know, anyone who's interacted with a transportation professional knows that we say a lot of things that are really technical and wonky. And the community doesn't always know what that means and understand the implications. So that's been something that is especially important to us. UDOT has also shifted, I would say, pretty substantially over the last few years toward focusing more on all users. And so as Tiffany was pointing out in her presentation, people walking, people biking, people scooting, and so forth. And so seeing an emphasis on that in this project has been really great. I think considering the land use context has been super important, thinking about where truck traffic makes the most sense versus regular vehicular traffic. And so, you know, I'll let you read through these on your own, but it has been an excellent experience. And I feel like the main thing is that Salt Lake City feels it's important to be at the table, and UDOT seems to agree that we'll come up with better solutions working together than if we go to our corners. So there are project elements that the city does support. And so I'll also call those out. A new interchange at the north end of Salt Lake that would pull truck traffic out of the neighborhood streets. That's something we hear from our residents about a lot, really important to them. The 600 North interchange, if anyone has ever walked or ridden a bicycle over that, it's very scary. And so we're looking forward to something that's much better than it is today. The protected bike path on Beck Street, eliminating that vehicle lane where we don't need it is huge, because a lot more people are commuting by bicycle now than they were a decade ago. In addition, we have e-bikes in the mix, and that market is growing substantially. And so people are willing to go longer distances biking to work, not worrying about getting sweaty when they arrive. There's also the potential for additional connections that improved east-west connectivity. So, you know, I'll talk about this a little bit more in my next slides, but east-west connections are especially challenging, and they're challenging for very practical reasons. It can really introduce delay if you have to go to the next intersection because there's a train blocking and you've got to find a place that has an overpass, that type of thing. But it's also, I think, a very important social issue for the city. And so I'll jump into that. I also want to call out this last bullet now that I'm noticing that it's there, which is that the probably biggest thing is, we have a resident along the corridor who already got ousted from her home. And she's over 100 years old. I can't remember exactly how old, but there was the possibility of this project displacing her yet a second time. And so it looks as though that won't happen now, and we're really happy about that. Some historical context and why Salt Lake City cares so much about this project is really about the background. I'm showing you redlining maps here, and this is essentially, these were used, I think most people are probably familiar with the concept of redlining, but essentially it was defining which neighborhoods were considered safe, which neighborhoods were considered dangerous. And a big part of that, here I'm jumping to the next one, quality of housing, rent and home values went into that, but also people's race and class and ethnicity. And that created a real divide within Salt Lake City long before there was a freeway. We care about that because people still carry that today, and that message of who belongs and who doesn't is reinforced by our infrastructure. Historically, we've put our infrastructure where it will have the least resistance, or it will either be uncontested or it will be thought of as contested by people whose voices don't matter as much. And so you can see here the map showing the A grade, the best or minimal risk, the most hazardous areas are the D grade areas. And if we look, so this is Salt Lake City, an aerial shot in 1950. And you can see a well-connected grid. There was the divide of the railroad tracks that's been there a long time. It actually, I learned this pretty recently. It forms, I'm trying to think of the right word, essentially how water is in our valley. And so the rails were there. When the freeway came, though, that added an additional barrier for people. And many cities experience this as sort of further defining who belongs, who doesn't. Okay, so this is showing you the same redlining map with I-15 drawn in, and you can kind of see how that alignment conforms to some of those boundaries and really is impacting the neighborhoods that were considered hazardous as opposed to not. So the effects persist today. And if you look at the data, you see racial segregation, you see income segregation, and a lot of this is now defined by our transportation infrastructure. So, it's important to us as a city to say we want to elevate all of our residents and not just those who live in the neighborhoods that were previously considered the okay neighborhoods. The primary concerns for Salt Lake City is further physical reinforcement of that east-west divide. Air quality is a huge issue. More traffic on I-15 due to induced demand, and I'll talk about that in a second. It's one of those wonky transportation terms. Negative health impacts and economic impacts have been pretty well documented, that if you're proximate to a freeway, your outcomes are worse. Noise pollution is also an issue, and that's something that I think we all experience if you think about walking down a quiet neighborhood street as opposed to a state street or a 7th East. You have to shout to the person next to you. And then, displacement of generational residents. And this is already an issue for Salt Lake City that's been pretty extreme in terms of the cost of housing in particular. And so we are looking to hang on to as much diversity in our city as we can. Really important. So induced traffic, this is just a little diagram from Transportation for America. And it shows that we've expanded, it's over, hold on, I'm going to actually read this so I make sure I get it right. The largest 100 urbanized areas between 1993 and 2017, we added 42% more lane miles. We only saw a 32% increase in population and 144% increase in delay. So essentially when I'm trying to think of a good comparison. If you say I have free pizza to offer, suddenly there's a lot of demand for pizza. And that's sort of what happens when you expand capacity, right? People know, oh, it's faster and easier, and I'm not going to sit in traffic, and I can maybe make more trips or move further away. Those kinds of things. You also see more development come when there's more freeway capacity. And so that adds additional trips and longer trips. A lot of factors go into that, but usually for, 1 to 5 years, you do see an improvement. Over time, however, you're talking about just more trips happening. Ultimately, it's worse for air quality. It's more time spent in traffic for people. This isn't anyone's fault, really. It's just kind of how it's like a economics principle, I guess. But, many people now are moving further into the hinterlands because of the price of housing. And so these issues are interrelated and tend to enhance one another. Looking at the statistics I just showed were national statistics. This is just looking locally. And honestly, I just pulled a random point on I-15 in a segment that's in the I-15 core project area. That project was completed in December of 2012. And so if what you're looking at here are traffic counts, basically as soon as you see them start to tick up, that's, the first year kind of stays level. It probably went down a little because of construction, right? And then you can just see it climb up. This pattern was true really all along the corridor. Generally speaking, at this particular location, the traffic increased about 44%. And that was consistent along the corridor, generally between 30 and 50% more traffic post-project. A huge concern for Salt Lake City, and if you've driven around Salt Lake City lately or walked around Salt Lake City or biked around Salt Lake City, you've seen a lot of orange cones. We passed an $87 million bond 4 years ago. We've been reconstructing our streets, but we're nowhere close to getting to the point where we're actually catching up with deferred maintenance. Huge issue for Salt Lake City. And this is going to sound weird, but electric vehicles make that worse because they're heavier. So wear and tear on the roads, but also in terms of ambient air quality, dust, that kind of thing. The main thing is that there is absolutely no support in Salt Lake City for widening our streets, our local streets. We don't want to take down homes. We don't want to take down businesses. That's not on the table at all. And so what that means is we'll have more trips coming into Salt Lake. We do have the biggest in commute in the nation, even more so than Washington, D.C., which was a surprising thing to me as a percentage of the population. And so most people are coming into the city during the day. Our population doubles. You may have heard that statistic before. It doubles each day during weekdays, and now generally on Saturdays as well, just due to visitors. And so once people arrive, they need to be able to get around in Salt Lake. The good news is we have very little congestion within Salt Lake City, and part of it is because we have that well-connected grid. That being said, you can only take so much before that starts to break down. Perhaps the bigger issue, though, is parking demand. So in our zoning, we have actually reduced our parking requirements and in some cases eliminated them, especially near transit. But what that means is the parking spaces per capita. I want to say downtown, we did the downtown plan in 2015. It was about 12 spaces per downtown resident that we had just for car storage. That is getting better, and it needs to because we need housing. The problem is that the more parking you need, the more expensive it is to build housing and other types of development. And it also just means that there's space being taken up for car storage that could be used for people. And in fact, one of the things that we get complaints about the most is people who are parked on the side of the street and living in their vehicle, because there is a free space for a vehicle, just not for humans. And so this is something that's of great concern to us, because, we don't want to increase the amount of parking, and the development community is going to have to respond to what the demand is in order to get financing. So if that means more parking, then that's what we'll see, means less housing. This is a long list of bullet points that I'm not going to go through in detail, but I'll leave them up there while I make a couple of closing points. Economic development is a big deal to Salt Lake City, and I think it is to the state as well, but it's materializing in different ways. And so for Salt Lake City, what we have noticed is that as we pursue companies that may want to come here, have a major location here, ultimately they end up deciding not to because of our air quality. It's huge. On the other side of it, you have our Westside communities, and they're sandwiched between the freeway and the rails and the inland port. And so those two things, I think, further communicate to those communities that they're not important. It's just a pass through. This is huge for us. And so, I think in terms of working on this project, again, part of why we're not just sort of stamping our foot and saying we're just against this project is to say, how can we make this project as low impact as possible on these communities? So the reality is, Salt Lake City residents are disproportionately paying for this project in terms of tax dollars. And not seeing the benefits necessarily. And so, in order to keep up with our road maintenance, in order to do the things we need to do for our residents, we need that economic development, right? And to be able to support the people who live here. So I think that's all I've got. There's my contact information in case you want to follow up. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're going to switch PowerPoints and hear from Meisei Gonzalez. Okay.
Awesome. Can you guys hear me all right? All right. Thank you so much for having me on this panel. Really great to hear the following fellow panelists on the information we just got. Really interesting, and definitely have a lot of questions already. My name is Meisei Gonzalez, and I am the Communications Director for the Healthy Environment Alliance of Utah, better known as HEAL Utah. A little background about HEAL Utah. We're an environmental policy nonprofit that works on clean air, clean energy, and toxic and radioactive waste issues throughout the whole state. We do this as a mix of working with community members as a grassroots kind of model, but also interfacing with state agencies, legislators, and different decision makers to find policies that can better our air quality, advances to renewable energy, and protect our communities from radioactive and toxic waste issues. I want to give a little bit of a background about some of the work HEAL Utah has done and why we're concerned about this expansion. So HEAL has done numerous different projects that tackle air quality emitters. This is primarily area source emissions, buildings, and also vehicles. And I just have a few examples up here of some of the projects. You guys can kind of see the different types of work that we do together with community. But we've done the Zero Fare for Clean Air, or Free Fare for Clean Air Days, in partnership with UCARE, the Utah Division of Air Quality, and funded by the Utah State Legislature. So it's actually quotations, Zero Fare, because we did get that funded through the legislature. And those were an effort to make public transit free on bad air quality days. We've also done a lot of accessibility and looking at policy that has to do with electric vehicle infrastructure. We know electric vehicles are still not accessible to everyone, and they're just part of the solution towards air quality, improving air quality. So we've been looking into that work. And we've also been doing a lot of advocacy for state implementation plans and just plans to get our state on the right track when it comes to air quality. And that's primarily what I'm going to be talking about today, is the air quality concern. We've been hearing a lot from community members, from individuals of different cities, just kind of advocating that they're worried of expanding this highway and getting more cars on the highway, making more air pollution. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I want to give a background of the areas that we're really looking into right now. So we have Salt Lake County and Davis County highlighted in the red. And these areas are actually, let me make sure I get my correct notes over here, been identified as non-attainment areas from the Environmental Protection Agency. And in the United States environmental law, a non-attainment area is an area considered to have air quality worse than national ambient air quality standards as defined in the Clean Air Act amendments of 1970. And this US National Ambient Air Quality Standards are limits of atmospheric concentrations of 6 pollutants. So we're talking about smog, acid rain, and other health hazards. And these are established by United States Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, and are under authority from the Clean Air Act. And I just really wanted to highlight that because we're going to be seeing a lot of maps and a lot of patterns within air quality disparities, highways, and also what we just saw in the last presentation, redlining issues in the past. So we have here the original, I think this is one that we have up on the website for UDOT's expansion proposal. And then I have another map on the right talking about the EPA's Environmental Justice Showcase communities. The Environmental Protection Agency recently has been working on a study of the west side of Salt Lake City to kind of prove some of these points that we are continually seeing from community members and what we've just been seeing from research here in Salt Lake, where we're seeing higher concentrations of air pollution on the west side. And this has a lot to do with just kind of not only geography, but also what we have on the west side. So as mentioned in the past presentation, we have things like the highways all interconnecting. We have the airport, we have the inland port development, and we have some high emitting factories and different industry on the west side. So all of this combined with our geography and continual developments on the west side have shown that this area is having higher concentrations of air pollution. And the communities that are listed within this are West Point, Jordan Meadows, Poplar Grove, Glendale, Fair Park, and Rose Park. And these areas have also been showing higher rates of asthma burdens and lower life expectancies compared to the east side of Salt Lake City. And this is all information that has been recently showcased by the Environmental Protection Agency. I think they're still working on finalizing and giving out the full report, but those are just some high points that I wanted to highlight from that report. So here are some concerns that Heal Utah has, as well as some solutions that we've been kind of looking into. So some of the concerns we have are elevated levels of vehicle emissions, including pollutants like carbon monoxide and nitrogen oxides. We're also looking at higher exposure to fine particulate matter PM2.5 from vehicle exhaust. And for those who need a little background on the PM2.5, just a smaller particulate matter that can actually travel through your airways, get stuck on organs, and really give you long-term health effects. And it's something that does come out from vehicle exhaust. We're also seeing disproportionate negative effects on nearby communities, often low income and minority neighborhoods. As listed in the past, we've seen the redlining history of this area, and it's a really big concern because when we look at the different intersections, a lot of these areas are also having issues with access to healthcare, access to housing, and having another burden on top of that with air quality would just kind of heighten some of these under-resourced communities. We also are seeing potential for heat island effects due to increase of pavement and reduced green spaces. So there's something new that we've really looking into for this highway expansion. Everyone's been talking about the air quality side of this, but we are starting to see some more indications of this highway potentially making more heat island effects on the surrounding areas. So we're going to be seeing higher temperatures, and it's really interesting. Something I recently learned, it kind of combines with different air pollution. So if we get some higher heat areas, we can also see higher ozone pollution, which is something that we're looking at throughout the summertime. So again, two of those effects for the environment, air quality and heat. We also have adverse impacts on respiratory health, especially for vulnerable populations, and challenges in meeting air quality standards and emission reduction goals. So as I mentioned in the past, we're in non-attainment, and we need to do everything possible to get us back to a level of safe air quality. So investing things like highways, for us, looks like an investment into pollution, just frankly with that. And then we have talked about induced demand that has been theorized for almost 100 years, and it's formally been studied since the 1960s. And it's just a basic kind of looking into, if you create more space, people will come. And we've seen a lot of these studies in cities in California as well as Texas. I don't know if you guys have driven in LA recently. I had the burden of doing that, and those freeways are gigantic, but there is still so much congestion. And actually reading into California, they're actually trying to take steps back from that and see how they can mitigate some of the harm that they created with the expansions of their freeways. On the right side, we have some of the things that we've really think that it should be looked into, and we were happy to see that we have you mentioned some of these in the EIS, but investment in public transit, active transportation infrastructure, urban planning and land use, and then micromobility options. We have been doing extensive community outreach with community members. We truly believe that solution comes from community. It's really important for agencies like UDOT and several different agencies to come in with community and find common ground and really understand the needs of the community, because individuals who are living by the freeway are the ones who are going to have to live with it throughout their whole life. So we want to make sure that they have their input with this expansion. A lot of the community currents that we've gotten, number one is displacement. Everyone who we talk to is really worried about displacement. Afterwards, we get air quality, air pollution concerns, economic concerns, and then also safety. A lot of individuals just highlight that they don't feel safe having a major freeway next to their neighborhood, which is something very interesting that we kept getting with. And here's just some images of the outreach we've been doing. We've been doing a lot of it within community, going to community gathering spaces, just holding space for community members to be able to give public comment. We know the public comment period is not open yet, but we have been helping individuals develop their public comments, as well as make it a little bit easier to access the public comment portal. Not everyone has access to internet, so some people just want to write down their thoughts, and we're getting those. We'll be getting those sent over to the Utah Division of Transportation. So we have here, just for everyone watching, you guys can definitely submit a public comment through HEAL's portal. And we want to highlight that we know some of these items are out of UDOT scope. So we've talked about this before of maybe UTA needs to get involved in this. But we want to really stress that UDOT didn't just wake up one day with 1.6 billion for this expansion. There was a big process for this, and we want to make sure to tackle each of those different agencies and really work with each of them. So these public comments will be sent to the Wasatch Front Regional Council, and we're also going to be talking with the Utah legislature, since they greenlit this money, to make sure that we have that trail and making sure that we can better implement these concerns within future projects. And that is all I have. Thank you.
Now we're going to switch cameras and hear from Dan Strong.
Thank you. I don't have a PowerPoint today, so you'll just have to watch me, I guess. But those presentations covered a lot of what I was going to cover, but I will try to do so just from kind of a more on-the-ground perspective as a resident of one of these communities. So I'm going to tell you a bit about who we are as the Westside Coalition, some of the history of our neighborhoods, and how this project plays into some of the trends we've seen in the last 60, 70 years. And then that'll kind of bring us up to right now and what we're doing on this project and what we hope to see. So starting with who we are, I'm the president of the Westside Coalition. The Westside Coalition is a neighborhood advocacy group. We represent all the folks who live or work on the West Side. We try to advocate for their health, safety, and quality of life. We have on our board of directors all 6 of the Westside Community Council chairs. So that's Rose Park, Fair Park, Glendale, Poplar Grove, West Point, Jordan Meadows. I think I forgot one. Hang on. No, I think I said them all. Okay, good. So anyway, those are the neighborhoods. We also have appointees from each of those councils and at-large members, and I'm one of those. And like I said, my bio, I've lived in Rose Park for over 10 years now. And in that time, I've learned a lot, and some of it was covered today, but about the history of how my neighborhood came to be what it is. And it's just funny, the more you look at something and think that you are the first person or generation to kind of realize this or notice this, and then you start digging into it and see this whole history with with trends and disparities and biases that we still deal with today that are really present today, and how, you know, the seeds were planted for these things long ago. And I think the big theme that I'd like to drive home today is just how do we reverse it? How do we change? How can we stop this trend from perpetuating for the next 70 years? And this project is one opportunity to stop and take a look and think about some of those things. So as was mentioned, the freeway running through our city is really kind of the original sin that divided east from west along with the railroad tracks. And it led to redlining and housing disparities, or it at least collaborated with those things and fed into those cycles, which led to a lot of the economic disparities that we see between East and West, and also created and furthered this longstanding now trend towards industrialization of the West Side. So once you have the freeway there, and once you combine that with redlining, it starts to become to be that, as was mentioned, the people who live there have less power, and then also fewer people live there as compared to the East Side. And so where do you start putting the needs that the city has? Things like power plants and airports and refineries, you put them there on the West Side, and we have all of those things there, train tracks as well. And, those trends started a long time ago, but they really just accelerate over time as things continue to grow. All of those infrastructure needs also continue to grow. And since they already have their roots on the West Side, we keep expanding them. So now we have an expanding airport. We have an expanding freeway that we're talking about today. We've just moved the prison to the West Side. Rocky Mountain Power recently bulked up its transmission cables that, put some sort of ugly tall power poles through running down my street, and kind of just contribute to this feeling that really this part of the city is for industry, not for people. And yet we live there and we play there, and we have our schools there. So that's the trend that started a long time ago, has accelerated, continued and accelerated recently as our city keeps growing, and it's growing much faster than it has in a long time. And, into that comes this freeway expansion project. And I guess I want to mention, although I know it's not the focus of the meeting, but if you look at the Wasatch Regional Council's long-term vision for Utah, it includes expansion of not just I-15, but I-80 and I-215, which kind of go in a belt around Rose Park and Fair Park neighborhoods. So, with this project today, there's some things that we don't hate about it, and we'll talk about those, and maybe we can survive this one. But looking to the next 50 years, are we going to need another expansion of I-15, and are we also going to need to expand the two other freeways? And at some point, is that just strangling the neighborhoods and people who live in those neighborhoods? So in addition to kind of the the industrialization vision or character that I've been talking about, there are also real impacts, real health impacts to these industrial, these infrastructure projects that are on the West Side. As was just mentioned by Heel, there was a recent EPA study for Region 8, which includes Salt Lake City, on environmental justice between East and West. And they are still finalizing that report, but we've seen kind of the data, and it confirms what we all know, that if you put all of these things kind of in one place, you're going to get worse air in those places, and not just air, but impacts to people's lives. Like it was talked about kind of having to wait at train tracks all the time, water, et cetera. And, the study really backs up all of those things. Westside Coalition was a partner in that study, and we had a bunch of focus groups where we heard qualitative real world examples of people dealing with these impacts. And I can tell you a couple just from my own life. One of my best friends and vice president of Westside Coalition moved recently, partly, maybe largely due to frustration from hearing about the freeway expansions. That's one. I have another friend, the prior president of the Westside Coalition, who left our area. He's an older gentleman and had severe lung problems that cleared right up when he moved, East Bench. I know these are anecdotes, but they're real impacts. People who are real advocates for our community who can no longer live there due to these things. So all this leads to kind of, as I suggested, people feeling kind of beat up, kind of hopeless, people moving away, those who can, or who want to and can. For myself, I love my neighborhood. Everybody I know loves our neighborhood. If you come to a lot of West Side community meetings, that's like the theme you'll hear. Everybody loves each other and the neighborhood and the schools and maybe just the people and kind of the vibe. These aren't places that people hate to live. We want to live there. I guess I'm fortunate in that I probably could move to a different neighborhood if I wanted to. I don't want to. I want to stay here. I want to raise my kids here. I want the diversity of these neighborhoods and the beautiful things we have in our community. And I feel as a parent, when I hear about the health impacts of the freeway and other things in our neighborhood that maybe I'm not making the right choice for them. And to have to choose between, the impact on my kids' health and the community that I'd like to raise them in is really an unconscionable choice that we should not have to make. So that's where I'm at on that. It's also sort of feeds, into a vicious cycle. So I'm also cognizant, I speak about my kids. They go to Newman Elementary. It's one of the schools that's on the chopping block for closure right now. And the reason for that, if there is one, I might debate you on that, but the reason that's being given for that is that we don't have enough students in the area in Salt Lake City, and especially on the west side in our neighborhood. And I think about the people who've moved out because of the health impacts and the industrialization trend we're talking about. And so now we've got to close a school. And when the school closes, well, now more people might want to move out because there's no longer a good school in their neighborhood. So we have fewer people and probably more industry and then more people moving out. It's a vicious cycle that feeds on itself. And so again, how do we break that cycle? How do we stop this cycle and bolster these neighborhoods? So it brings us all to today, to the instant issue. And I'm very cognizant, as mentioned in the presentation earlier, UDOT and the team that's been tasked with community engagement on this really unfortunate project has done a good job engaging with us and listening. And we do appreciate that. And I'm not here to castigate UDOT or the people who are here to speak about it, but I do want to put what's happening in a context and kind of explain to you where we're coming from. So the bottom line is that everyone I've talked to and everyone on our board does not want to see the freeway expansion happen. We're against it. I mean, that's the bottom line, because it plays into this longstanding trend. It furthers it. There's no indication that it's going to stop. It could happen again in another 20 years. And again, if we don't change this, eventually these neighborhoods are going to not exist, at least not in their current form. We have a really hard time believing that there's no other option. When we're told that there's not, this has to happen because of the growth of the state, it's hard for us to believe that we can't find a better way. I've lived in other cities, like in the Bay Area, where, the freeways are not fun to drive on. LA, the freeways are not fun to drive on. It takes a long time. And those cities, at least some of them that have been more successful, have really invested in public transit as a solution. I know that we have talked about this project and that it includes double tracking the front runner, and that's a positive development, but we could go a lot bigger on our public transit and probably alleviate some of these needs. I mean, mainly we're talking about here, aside from, nationwide kind of road trip travel, we're talking about people who need to get from Davis County to Salt Lake City. And, there's only a couple of real relevant stops along that route. It could easily be achieved, in my opinion, and most opinions of people I've talked to, with a robust public transit network feeding into the one that we already have in Salt Lake, which is growing and getting better at getting people kind of to their last mile. So invest in that. That's the way the future. Every great city in the world really that passes a certain point of growth develops a good public transit system, and maybe we're at that point where we need to do that for the Wasatch Front. So that's kind of our main top line position. In a world where this does happen, and I know it's pretty far down the tracks already, there are some things that we would like to emphasize as needs and be at the table for those things. And so, like the city mentioned, we're kind of in a position of one, opposing this, but two, wanting to communicate our desires within this project if it does occur. So one of those is, again, we want to be at the table, and we appreciate being invited to the table today and the other events UDOT's had. We want to, top line concern, as Heal Utah mentioned, is we want to eliminate we don't want any homes to be eliminated or displaced or removed. That's number one. And we're encouraged that in the current version of the plan, it looks like there will not be any homes removed in Salt Lake. And that's really our red line issue that we will fight tooth and nail on if that changes. So that's our number one. In the world where this happens, no homes removed. Number two is air quality. So I know that the environmental impact statement is coming, and we will be really interested to see if there's data on the air quality impact of this. It is a non-attainment area, and what we've been told is that the project will meet the attainment standards in some fashion or get us closer. And I'm a little skeptical on that, but I would love to see the data behind that, and I hope that's true. Three probably is east-west connectivity. So trying to kind of undo that original sin of the freeway separating our neighborhoods. The more we can do to make it easy, not just to drive between east and west, but to walk and bike between east and west, I think will really help the whole city come together. Then on the interchanges, the off ramps, et cetera, we want to see more pedestrian infrastructure, more cycling infrastructure, and really be cognizant of the fact, I think we're a little bit unique in this, that because the freeway is kind of layered on top of our existing neighborhood, where in other places the neighborhood's developed after the freeway, we feel that when you exit the freeway, you are coming immediately into, residential housing with not a lot of transition time. So we had a few pedestrian fatalities on the 6 North off-ramp during my tenure as Rose Park chair, and we advocated for improvements to that off-ramp that have been put in place and I think have been helpful. We want to make sure we don't repeat those mistakes. So when these off-ramps get redeveloped or changed, we need to think about how to communicate visually and kind of with the shape of the road and just really just make it impossible for people to speed off the freeway at freeway speeds into our neighborhoods, because that's what happened in the past. And then so again, no elimination of houses, better east-west connectivity, better air quality, and then improved pedestrian cycling infrastructure on the off ramps. And then, of course, we're really interested in what happens while this is being completed. It's going to be years, and we don't want people to have to move due to construction either. And so we need to learn and hear more about that. And then finally, there's a couple of motels that if you needed to pave over those, we're fine with it. So I want to put that out there. Okay. That's just my own side note. I haven't actually talked to anybody about that. Okay. I think that is mostly what I wanted to cover. I guess ways to get involved. We have been involved with the People Against or People Over Freeways Coalition, and we support kind of their mission. We are also an independent group and may have slightly divergent views on certain matters, and so you can get involved with us as well. WestsideSLC.org. We have our candidate forum coming up next week on Tuesday. The mayoral candidates will be there. We expect to be talking about this issue. Heal Utah is going to be there as well, I think, and the I-15 team as well. So that's at the Fair Park next Tuesday at 6. And other than that, thank you for inviting me.
Okay, thank you very much to all of our panelists. I wanted to, now that it's clear that we should have had UTA and the Wasatch Front Regional Council here to beat up on, I wanted to just point out that the EIS, the Environmental Impact Statement, is not yet out. And so there's going to be some apparently choices that are going to be presented to us. Tiffany, could you remind us where are we going to see the EIS and how is the public going to be able to comment?
Yeah, when the draft environmental statement is available, we will be doing direct to the community. Everybody within a half mile of the corridor will be getting direct mailers notifying them of the opportunity to comment, both in English and in Spanish. We will use both media and social to get the word out on the opportunity for public comment. We will be hosting some community engagements and as well as some open houses for people to come and ask questions, because we will have a lot more. I have made some notes about, I am not an environmental expert, but at the open houses, we will have our technical experts there, our transportation officials, our environmental and NEPA people. So that is the best time to, be available to come talk to our, but if those dates don't work, again, we will have a 45-day comment period. Our team is ready and available to come to your home or to your community, to an event. I look forward to talking more with Heal. Sounds like there's been some great engagement there that I would love to engage with in the future. And so I think I answered your question of, we are trying to use as many outlets
It's going
as
to be
possible.
posted on your website?
On the
UDOT's
website, yes.
And how will comments be received?
We will have a couple of different options. You can go to our website and put a comment on the website. We have a mailing list for people who maybe don't have internet. Again, we will make ourselves available at the open houses. Also, we will make translation services available via either phone, if that's an option. And I'm open to other ideas, honestly. Like, community, you let me know how to get the voices heard so that I can get the right comments at the right time. So,
and you expect there will be some choices that are set forth in the draft environmental impact statement.
In the draft, the department will come forth with what's called a preferred alternative. So what the department thinks is the best solution for the corridor. We again welcome comments on that and thoughts on that. There are still some alternatives that we do need feedback on. Some of them are the crossings of the I-15 corridor. We've heard, just to be transparent, very mixed messages about removing that barrier and having some crossings between 600 North and 4th South. So really, that's a big for Salt Lake specifically, a big component that we are very interested in engaging with.
Okay, thank you very much. Do any of the panelists want to respond to each other before we take questions from the audience?
Just on that last point, I'll say we also hear mixed feedback from our own residents about that. So obviously, if you're on, I think one of the proposals is to run a crossing at 400 North. I think big picture, that would be good for the West Side. For people who live on 400 North, it may be less good for them, so that's kind of tough for us to take a strong position because we don't want to throw any one street under the bus while we still want to advocate for kind of big picture needs. So hopefully this, I know the city can sometimes also speak to the bigger vision of things, but I guess my own perspective, and I'm just speaking for myself now, not the whole West Side Coalition, but is that, these are historical problems and they need kind of long-term solutions, and east-west connectivity is a big part of that. So.
Thank you. Do we have any comments, questions? Oh, we're looking for questions, not comments, because there's going to be an opportunity to comment online when we know more. Do you want to come up to the mic here?
This is just a simple question. So 45 days to comment. Then when do you expect to have something final and a recommendation? It doesn't seem like enough time for all the stuff you have going on with that project.
Sure. So that'll be the process. That'll be the formal comment period, the 45 days. Once that time period is up, UDOT considers those comments, responds to comments, and reads every one of those comments. And then there'll be a period of time while we write our final record of decision, is what we call it, for the environmental impact statement. And at that point, that'll complete the EIS phase of the project. So, and I'll just emphasize here.
So is there a body that's not UDOT? Like in Salt Lake, we have a planning commission that reviews the plans,
So
recommendations.
let me back up, and maybe what you're asking is how does a project become a project? And so this is a project that our transportation commission, it's a state commission. You have a couple of local representatives on there. There's 7 representatives on the commission, and one from each of the 4 UDOT regions. So there's a Salt Lake, Tooele, Summit County region, and that so the person representing that is Natalie Gochner, and then there's also an at-large member of the commission who's from, I believe he's in Salt Lake City proper, and that's Lou Kramer. But so the project, the list of projects that the commission uses to decide, okay, what are we going to do next? How are we going to use the money that the legislature has appropriated to us? That comes from the Metropolitan Planning Organization's Regional Transportation Plan. So they put together a transportation plan that has 30 years of projects, and that plan is financially constrained. Okay, so that means that all the folks in Utah, all the planning organizations in Utah get together and they kind of allocate, okay, here's how much money we're going to spend. And because it's required, it's a federal requirement, we have to have a financially constrained plan. And so Wasatch Front Regional Council is the MPO for this area. This particular project was put on their plan in the first phase. So it's a 30-year plan, and it was put on the first phase, which is about the first 10 years. And that first phase is what the Transportation Commission uses to choose, okay, here's what our next projects are going to be. So they take that whole first phase statewide. There's 4 metropolitan planning organizations in the state, plus UDOT does the planning for the areas where there is no MPO or metropolitan planning organization. So it was just one of the projects on the list, and they decided to fund that, and it was funded, and they've moved forward. The first phase of a plan or of a project is often the environmental impact statement, because you have to have that. It's required federally for us to move forward with the project. And so that's the phase we're in right now. But yeah, it was put on the regional transportation plan long ago. And then the commission chose that as one of the
But
plans.
it's put on as a big plan, like we need to expand the freeway, or the freeway doesn't have enough capacity.
You're right. It doesn't have the details of, okay, here's how we're going to change each interchange, but it is fairly
And this
specific
process
for.
now is deciding those details.
Yes, you got it. Yep.
That's what I was getting at.
Okay.
Let me just comment that Tiffany Pocock's presence has changed a bit. She had to leave early, and Leif Elder is also with UDOT and is here to respond to questions. And I didn't get an entire bio to introduce Leif, but
And I can do that really quick if you.
sure.
Thank you, Linda. And I just want to say, you guys have a great leader for your organization. Linda's just been a class act as I've interacted with her on this, and really appreciate Linda. So thank you. Leif Elder, again, worked for UDOT. I've been with UDOT for just 2.5 years. Prior to that, I also worked in a couple of different places in state government with the state auditor's office, and then also with the legislature. And I staffed their transportation committees as well as their revenue and taxation committees. So I've been in state government for about 18 years. So
I think Meisei
just wanna
wanted to
ask-
say something.
For clarification, Leif, so we have the 45-day comment period, but I think what we're trying to kind of gauge is how much time after that is it going to take to get the final yes or no, what's going to get implemented in there? So are we talking months, a year? Because I think a lot of individuals want to know what happens after that 45-day.
sure. So I'm coming to that chart that we showed up there, and there isn't it's not defined amount of time. And so if I bring up the gondola, I know that's a controversial issue, but you saw, and so I didn't work on that EIS or anything. I'm not an engineer. I'm a policy guy, right? But I got a lot of questions from legislators and other people. When's that going to happen? And, at one time it was, well, we're going to release the draft this winter. And then it became this spring. And then it became this summer, because there were so many comments to look at, 15, 20, 30,000 comments on that. And so it just kind of depends on how many comments are made and how long it takes to work through those comments and to respond to those comments. And so it's not really a defined thing. I would expect the draft to be released in the next month, 2 months, something like that. And then at that point, the 45 days, that's defined. That's not going to change. The 45 days happens, and then you go through that phase again of looking at the comments and trying to respond. And in cases, you're changing your EIS because maybe some things came up that you didn't think of, or there's so much interest in a particular aspect of something that where it's like, oh, that's a little bit of a new wrinkle. And so you try to work on these things. And I don't remember your name. You probably go through this process and understand. I see you shaking your head kind of knowingly. It's like, yeah. I know that's not precise, but that's kind of
Definitely helps
Where
us
we're at.
put it in
Okay.
perspective.
And then after UDOT comes up with the final EIS, what happens next? Does the EPA have to approve it, or?
Yeah, so that is we have in our state what's called NEPA assignment. Okay. And what that means is we have the ability to approve the final approval for our environmental. We sign that document, which means that when there's lawsuits and things, then we're on the hook for that. But of course, there is review at the federal level. Don't get me wrong here, but once that's signed, we can move forward with the project. And I think the plan for that project, if I'm remembering the timeline correctly, is 2026. Is that right? I think so. Yeah. So that's the plan right now, is to move forward with construction in 2026. So
we've got some questions online, but if anybody else in the room has a question. Shauna, why don't you give us some questions online?
All right, I'm just going to ask these kind of as we have time. So, so given everything that's been said, what can we do? What can be done to prevent the expansion? And is there any hope or any possibility of, instead of doing this, that we add the 1.5 billion to our public transit?
Yeah. So the particular, it's a complex question. And I guess I should first say, keep being involved, keep commenting. When the EIS, the draft EIS comes out, there'll be specific preferred alternatives that you can look at and comment on both. And I like that the folks here on the panel have said, there's some things we like. If we have to do this, here's some things that we like. So you should give those comments as well as, here's some things we don't like. Because I think both comments are valuable, and it's important for us to understand that. As far as using that money for transit, so let me already say, so UDOT was given a responsibility in 2022 by the legislature to do transit capital development for UTA. And so we're involved now with that capital development. So I can speak a little bit about that. Right now on the front runner, that's the most comparable piece of transit when you're looking at our spine, I-15 going up and down the state. The front runner is kind of the spine, the freeway, if you will, of transit. Right now, you probably know we are in the middle of doing an EIS for double tracking a number of portions. It roughly double the number of double tracked portions of the front runner. And that's really important because right now the timing has to be just perfect so those trains can pass each other, because there's so few places where there's two tracks. And if there wasn't two tracks, you can see the problem that would occur, right? And so I think right now 25% of front runner is double tracked, and we're trying to take that to about 50%. That'll allow UTA to add about 10 more trains a day. Which is a nice thing. So right now during peak hours, it's about 30 minutes between trains. If you get there right after that train leaves, you got to sit there and wait. So this is going to be good, because we're trying to take that 30 minutes to 15. That's a lot better. And on the off-peak hours, it's 60 minutes, and we're trying to take that 60 minutes. I mean, if you can imagine just missing that train, boy, that doesn't make for a nice experience, does it? We're trying to take that 60 minutes to 30 minutes. And, this is a phased approach for the front runner. And so it should, after that project's done, that's supposed to be finished, in 2029 or so. It takes a long time to go through the environmental stuff and then purchase the trains. If you can believe it, the kind of bottleneck for that project is actually purchasing the additional trains, of all the things. And it just takes a while to order those and then for them to make them. But anyway, so that project's going on. And so I want you to know there's investment going on in transit right now. As far as taking the 1.6 billion and putting it on transit, UDOT cannot do that. And here's why. That pot of money, that $1.6 billion, gosh, that's a lot of money, isn't it? $1.6 billion is in a fund called the Transportation Investment Fund. And that the purpose of that fund is statutorily limited to expansion of roads. And so, give you an example, they just expanded Highway 89. There may have been a lot of people with some similar feelings, as we've heard expressed here, of, gosh, we don't want to give up these homes. We don't want people to have to move. We don't want these things. UDOT has been buying homes for this project on Highway 89 that goes from about Farmington, roughly where this project ends, all the way up to getting close to Ogden, but not quite there, up to where you take off on 84 to go to Morgan. And so this project, we've been buying homes since 1998 to make this project happen. It went from 5 lanes to 6 lanes in each direction, no longer having a turn lane because they turned it into a freeway. I don't know if you've been on that facility, but that is a great example of just a project that, it was needed for the area. The community had to come to grips with, okay, wow, we have to give up all these homes and to make this better in the long run. I-15 is a little bit different. We have somebody from Salt Lake City here, and I-15, believe it or not, wasn't built to get to Salt Lake City. There was an important reason that it went through Salt Lake City. It's the capital of our beautiful state here in Utah, but it was built to connect. It's an interstate, right? So it was built to connect states, and it had to go somewhere. And our models show that there's a high demand, and that doing this project will help that demand for years to come. And I understand that it's not as simple as that. There's a lot of complexities to it. There's air quality issues. There's the past inequities that occurred by putting the freeway right there. It had to go somewhere, but anyway, trying to answer your question and also make a few comments, I guess, but can I?
No,
We have a couple more questions.
we do have a couple more. And I'm reading these out. They're not.
Yeah, no,
mine.
yeah, absolutely.
Well, I mean, this is kind of along those lines, and maybe someone else may want to respond to it as well, but it really is for UDOT. It's what is the ultimate goal for I-15? How does the expansion affect or approach that goal? And do we plan on expanding I-15 continuously as long as traffic continues to be induced?
I don't know that I know the full answer to that, but let me tell you, this is, I've heard my boss say, so my boss is Carlos Braceras, the executive director of UDOT. And the legislature we've had to help the legislature come to grips with the fact that we can't build I-15 big enough to support all the population we think is coming by 2015, 2060, right? And we've told them that it's got to be a multimodal system. So that includes transit, and that includes the active transportation piece, the walking, the pathways, the micro transit. I love that slide you had up there. And we've been instrumental in helping, I think, the legislature realize that. And so now, not only do they just have that I said that 1.6 billion came from that Transportation Investment Fund. So for short, we call it the TIF, right? And over the last 4 or 5 years, the legislature created what's called the TIF, which stands for the Transportation Investment Fund. And so there's a certain amount of money that goes there. It's, it's fairly small compared to what goes into the road fund, the TIF, but it's getting bigger. And I think there's a realization that we need to look at not just roads, but multifaceted, multimodal transportation, because we can't do it all with the roads. And I think the legislature has gotten that message, and they're starting to shift some of that funding over this past session. So another TIF, we call it the ATIF. That's the Active Transportation Investment Fund. That was adopted this past session. And they put $45 million ongoing in there to build a trail network and across the state over the next 10 to 20 years. I hope when we look back that we're going to think, wow, I'm so glad we did that. Look at the trails, the people using their electric vehicles, electric bikes and scooters and things on those trails. And I hope, and that was something proposed by UDOT. We can only propose stuff just like any of you. We can't make it happen. I always say it's about 38, 15, and 1. So you got to have 38 representatives, 15 senators, and 1 governor to say we're going to do that. But anyway.
Can I expand a little bit on that as well? I think it's really important for us to advocate for our legislators to put more money into this TTIF, into the ATIF, because as you mentioned, there's not 1.6 billion in there for public transportation. And I think they need to hear that. And that's why I think it's really important that HEAL is going to send these comments to our legislatures to show the amount of support there is for public transit. Just wanted to highlight that part.
I'll emphasize that as well. And I'm going to say in my comments, like, it's helpful to communicate with us because we can message that up. But I think it's even more impactful to speak to your representatives and senators directly as their constituents, and make sure you're talking to the people who represent you and make this as a priority issue for them to fund public transit. Because ultimately, the folks on the Wasatch Regional Council include members of the state legislature, and that's really where the power is in our state. So, yeah.
I'll just say you guys have amazing representatives and senators. I've gone to some town halls on this issue, and they have represented you and fought for you, and they're just amazing folks. So
I'm going to think that these are their concluding comments, and I just want to ask if Julianne wants to make a concluding comment to chime in with everyone else.
Sure. I think it is perhaps important to think about our investments and how they complement each other, and that is really an important consideration. In terms of public transit, if you think about the amount of funding, and this is not just true for Utah, and it's not just something that UDOT is doing as their own thing, but at the federal level, we are spending so much more to subsidize driving than we are to subsidize transit. It's just night and day. And that mix has got to shift. I think the federal government recognizes that. And so in the bipartisan infrastructure law, there are a lot of elements that I think even the feds are grappling with, because we as a nation have built a machinery to crank out freeways. And so it takes a long time to undo that. I think we are on the cusp of that, the very beginning stages of that, but it takes a long time to undo that. And it's really the voices of people that help make that happen. And so I'm glad to know this group is a politically active one, I assume. And that's really helpful. Talk to all your friends because these issues are really important. They affect real people's lives. And bottom line, no one likes sitting in traffic, and it makes logical sense to anyone who's sitting in traffic that, well, sure, just make it wider. And if human beings were water going through a pipe, that would work. And we're not. We have behavior that responds to the conditions around us. And widening is not the thing that makes that better, even though it seems like it should.
I'd like to thank our panelists tonight. And we're going to excuse them because they probably have families to go home to and things to do. And then we're going to have a follow-up short meeting about next week, about other things that are going on. So thank you, panelists. I should say, as they're leaving, that our next meeting is going to follow up with interest in public transit. Our next general meeting on October 18th at 6 p.m. live and online, we will be about HTRZs, housing transit reinvestment zones. Are they a solution to encouraging public transit and providing affordable housing? So you'll all want to come back next month. We'll have speakers from the Wasatch Front Regional Council, from UTA, from Sandy City, and perhaps one of our league members who's an expert on Salt Lake City will be letting us know what Salt Lake City is doing to study HTRZs. Our next events are going to be unit meetings. And we have the unit meeting slide, which we made a slide for unit meetings. It's just so exciting. All right. Next slide. Yes. So our next unit meeting, the Night Owls meet on the fourth Monday of the month, which is this next Monday, September 25th at 7:30 at Holiday Library. It's live and on Zoom. The Summit Wasatch County unit meets the last Tuesday of the month. That'll be next Tuesday, the 26th at 11 a.m. only on Zoom. Their topic is going to be UN Climate Summit Issues Warning and look at Utah's geothermal energy prospects with Tom Moyer in the discussion topic. Chris Cherniak will give an update on the local flu and COVID outlook plus the drought. That's a lot, covering a lot of important topics. There's a new group called the Original Night Owls, which will meet the last Tuesday of the month as well, but at 7:30 p.m. at 862 East Harrison Avenue in Salt Lake City. And last but not least, the Town Club meets the first Thursday of the month. That'll be next, the following Tuesday, October 5th. I'm sorry, Thursday, October 5th at 11 a.m. in person at the Town Club. This program is followed by an optional lunch with payment and RSVPs in advance. Please contact Kathy Bealey if you want to attend the lunch. Now we have some updates.
If I could just chime in really quick, because we
Yes.
did an ad on here and I just want to call attention to it. I apologize. We also have a brand new unit starting. It's called Mid-Valley Slack Channel Unit. It is a unit that is going to be held asynchronously on chat, targeting folks in the Mid-Valley like Midvale, Murray, etc. And if you're interested in that, reach out to mswanger28@gmail.com.
Thank you, Shauna. Next, we're trying to do some updates. And I think our updates, our first update is going to be from Kirby Coyle with the Observer Corps. Kirby needs to be made a participant and her face will show up there instead of I-15 expansion. Housing Transit Reinvestment Zones. There's also TRZs, which are Transit Reinvestment Zones. So one is, are we talking buses and UTA and tracks, or are we talking front runner and trains? But we're going to talk both. I'll make some more announcements while we try to get Kirby on. So we wanted to follow some issues this year, and I want to give you some update on those issues. One is the quarry in Parley's Canyon. You know that there was a public comment to the Division of Air Quality that closed July 27th. They received 1,400 comments, which I think is a lot, including ours. There's been no news since that time. If you want to follow up on that, I would recommend following the local environmental groups that are particularly active with the Parley's Canyon, which would be Save Parley's, Save Our Canyons, and Utah Physicians for Healthy Environment. Now, we're interested in following the Great Salt Lake. You may have noticed, if you read your media, that there's a lawsuit filed about the Great Salt Lake. Utah Physicians for Healthy Environment, the Center for Biological Diversity, Utah Rivers Council, the Sierra Club, and others are suing the state of Utah for failing to protect the Great Salt Lake. They are represented by Earth Justice, which is a national environmental law firm, and the local law firm of Zimmerman and Boer. The argument is under the public trust document under the Utah Constitution. And the Utah Supreme Court has dealt with the public trust doctrine in the case dealing with the plan to dredge Utah Lake. The plaintiffs are asking that the state be ordered to ensure a sufficient water flows to the lake to achieve a sustainable level in the lake. And you recall last year there was an argument that the legislature should adopt this, and they didn't. And so now they're being sued. UPHE is raising funds for this litigation. So if anybody is interested in supporting this litigation, you can go to their website, the Utah Physicians for Healthy Environment. The gondola, we want to follow up on the gondola. There's been such interest in the gondola, we've decided to make our November meeting about the gondola. And stay tuned. Sometime this week, we'll be announcing who our speakers are. And now Kirby Coyle is going to give us an update on the Observer Corps. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it so much. And wonderful presentation. And what is remarkably interesting is that the presenters today and the program today and the one that we'll have at the next general meeting are all reflective of the county and local government committee members reporting on the observations they have made to local and county community groups. That includes city councils, school boards, the police commission, and the water districts. So I wanted to be sure to remind our observers and any new members who may be planning to attend the new member orientation to consider joining us in the Observer Corps. We have a remarkable team of 17, and we're looking for 7 more who listen to the meetings and report back to the League of Women Voters of Salt Lake County and the Summit and Wasatch counties on what we are hearing, what matters most. And it really does support what the League of Women Voters is all about, which is defending democracy and ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to have input and to know and understand what's going on in their local community and to get out and vote for those who agree with your perspectives. We are a nonpartisan organization. We have folks who are listening to all communities in the county, and recently in 3 different communities: Sandy, Salt Lake, Riverton, the issue of the development and housing and development and transportation links that we have just talked about here has come up multiple times in local community councils and city council meetings. So mayors are paying attention to the league, and the league is paying attention to our voters. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and I hope to see many of our observers and their guests this coming Saturday at 8:30 a.m. We are meeting at Ruth's Diner in Immigration Canyon. So hope everybody can come at 8:30 in the morning, join us for coffee and chat and conversation. And you can order a muffin or an egg if you want. Thank you.
Kathy Fitz just wants to ask a quick question before Kirby leaves.
I want to say that I read the reports in the okay. I read your reports in the weekly brief, and they're all very interesting. I think you're doing a fantastic job. And the question I have is, are you able to attend any school board meetings?
Yes, we actually have observers at school board meetings, including the Salt Lake. We have school board representatives now, and we need others, but we have people attending the Canyon School District board meetings, the Jordan School District board meetings, and in addition to that, we have the Murray City School District board meetings. We do not currently have someone attending the Salt Lake City board meetings.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, just quickly, I want to call everybody's attention to the fact, I think many of you might know that tonight we were co-sponsoring a candidate forum with Eastside, which took some of our folks out away from here. And also on Tuesday, a week from, next Tuesday with Westside Coalition at the fairgrounds, we're sponsoring a candidate forum out there. And that is going to include a mayoral debate moderated by Laura Jones of KRCL with Rocky Anderson, Aaron Mendenhall, and Michael Valentine. So look on the calendar of our website, lwvsl.org, for more details.
And last but not least, I need to announce the new members that have joined since June. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 13, lucky 13 new members. Melody, I'm gonna butcher some of these names, so I'm sorry this is being recorded, or maybe it's not. Melody Morgan, Iragi Neshangalume, Carol Douglas, Catherine Brainerd, Lisa Adair, Stephanie Willis, Molly Briscoe, Andrea Rodriguez, Caroline Gleich, Catherine McCary, Cindy Mecklenburg, Charlotte Robinson, and Callie York. We hope, welcome you all. Hope if you're here, you wave, and we hope you get involved in some aspect of the leagues. We can always use some more volunteers with the program. Somebody else beside me could moderate this, you never know. Any other announcements from anybody else? Okay, well, thank you so much. I'm glad you could attend, and we'll look forward to seeing you all next October 18th.
Thank you.